You're listening to a Developer Experience Podcast, a podcast about the experience of being a developer or really any person in tech. In this episode, I talk to my friend Jay Cincotta. Jay tells me why he is skeptical about tools and systems in the context of getting things done. Instead, he focuses on establishing a few strong, clear guideposts and allows himself to be flexible everywhere else. Thanks for giving it a listen. How are you doing? Are you good?
I'm good.
Okay, so cool. First thing I would like to do is have you introduce yourself. Tell me who you are. I don't know, maybe some things about you.
Sure. So I'm Jay Cincotta, and I started programming, I realized, 40 years ago.
Nice.
I was a touring musician, and I quit, and I found myself transitioning from playing piano in St. Thomas to being in the basement of the University of Maryland computer science building, punching cards on a key punch, and then running a shoebox of them up to the to a window where you had to submit your deck, and then you would get a listing back. So that's where I started from.
Wow.
And been through a lot of changes through then. I worked with big companies, small companies. Owned a company for a while, sold that 3 years ago, and now I work 100% remote, managing a small but mighty team. There's just four of us, and we do all of the software for a pretty big parts company, and we do the web stuff and all the internal line of business systems. But just a tiny little team, and the owner of the company is like my best friend. So
that's awesome.
So it's been an interesting journey, and with a lot of different kinds of things along the way.
Sure. Sounds like a pretty successful life, if you ask me.
It's a nice pre-retirement here now, for sure. We went from the East Coast to the West Coast. I live in Oregon, where it's just gorgeous. And empty nesters. I have two boys that are now off on their own. So yeah, having a lot of fun.
Cool. Jay, you and I met at a conference years ago. And I don't know, you reached out to me afterwards. And we connected. I think you asked if I would mentor you, and you offered to pay me money. Yes. And I was like, of course I will do that. But then at some point I felt bad because really I just like hanging out with you.
Cool. So. Thanks. I love that conference. That was exactly at this inflection point where I had sold my company in Maryland, sold my house. We put everything in storage. My wife and I spent a good part of a year just driving across the country, not sure where we were going to end up. Before I had left, I had a couple things where I thought I was going to land, and basically at the end of the year, we had moved into the house, had this big mortgage, and all of those fell apart. So I suddenly found myself, it's like, oh man, I have to find a job. And I decided I wanted to get into, I went to this conference, Code Mashed, where I met you, to just kind of make some connections and figure out what am I doing next. And you gave a lecture on React. And for me, it was like, that's it. I want to do that. But I don't know how to do that. And that's what I want to get a job doing. And that was the basis of approaching you, like, hey man, can you help mentor me with this? Yeah. It's been a fun few years.
Yep. It definitely, I remember early on, just like watching you grow as we were pairing on stuff, which was pretty fun to see. That very quick early growth where like, it's not as easy. You feel like you're kind of fumbling around, and then all of a sudden 6 months later, you're writing things that I'm not writing. And I'm like, you're working on pretty cool stuff right now.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. Cool. Jay, could you do me a favor and maybe talk a little bit about, like, what are the systems that you use to manage your time, to get things done? Checklists, task lists, notebooks, any types of those things that help you.
Yeah. So with that, the thing I've struggled with this, trying to get ready for talking with Steve, because I actually have used a lot of systems. Have spent lots of time trying out different systems, and I have a tendency to go like really deep. Like anything worth
Mhm.
doing is worth overdoing.
Mhm.
But I've kind of also come as I've gotten older, and I'm in this situation now where it's a very small team, and I've come to be really skeptical about tools and systems. So the more and more I find I'm just leaning on a few things, but it's really more focused on people than systems. So
Hmm. That's
um,
interesting.
yeah, that's what I'm finding out is more important. So like, oh, we, for instance, with my team, we talk a lot. We're on Slack a lot. We frequently, upgrade from uh, chat to impromptu meetings. With
Mhm.
where we're seldom like scheduling a time. It's like, hey, can you talk now? Or it's like
Sure.
5 minutes, and we do use a Kanban board, but even for that, we use Trello rather than systems that are like for specifically for agile development, and it's deliberate.
Yeah.
The thing that I most love about Trello is it's no particular structure. You want an extra column, you just create it. So like we start out basically, to do, doing, and done,
Mhm.
right? But then it's like waiting on Bob.
Mhm.
There's a bunch of those. Create a column for that, and then they come, they go, and creating this structure is flexible. And to me, I'm finding that that's really more important because it's about the people. The tools that we're using is just a way of getting a mind meld among the people you're working with,
Mhm.
and I'm finding that keeping that as lightweight as possible. It's kind of like the Agile Manifesto, right? It's people and relationships, not documentation and systems.
Mhm.
And I'm finding that really refreshing.
Yeah.
In contrast, I've had done a lot of work with consulting companies earlier in my career, either working for as a consultant for a company that was doing Fortune 500 consulting, or owning my own consulting company,
Mhm.
where there it was always about very formal systems and adapting things, and we were doing fixed price contracts, so you had to have what are the requirements and what's the review process. And I spent hours in meetings just talking about, well, what are the status codes we should have for the status of a task in our
Mhm.
workflow system, and how do we track the dependencies between these things.
Right.
And the older I get, the more it's like none of that matters. All of that is waste in itself. The only thing that matters in the end is like, do you have smart people working together doing the right thing?
Yeah.
That that's all you really care about, and all of the tools is just a means to that. Smart people working together doing the right thing. So all the requirements analysis is like, are we doing the right thing? All of the status tracking is like, are we working together?
Yeah.
And you just want like as little of that as you can get away with to get to that goal. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, Jay, this reminds me of something we talked about actually before we hit record. We were talking about organization of tools and being
Mm-hmm.
able to find things and organizational systems. And one of the things you said to me that you thought that what was most important was to be flexible in most things, but I don't remember the words that you used, but like rigid or structured in just a few things. And that kind of sounds like what you're describing. Is that
Yeah,
accurate?
yeah. The same thing. The thought is that it's like this: the world fundamentally is analog, but we as programmers we live in a digital world, right? So everything is shades of gray, and ultimately we're about 0 and 1, so it's black and
Mhm.
white. And within your life and within your tooling, it's like I'm finding the sweet spot is don't try and keep everything perfectly categorized and organized.
Mhm.
Just a few things. Just what are the few things that matter, and then have really crisp boundary lines on just those few things that make a difference,
Sure.
and allow the gray, allow the flexibility in the other stuff. So, I mentioned Trello earlier. That
Hmm.
we love Trello because it's not, we don't try and put all the full specs in there. We just document enough to make sure that we're understand what we're doing, and what we're doing makes sense, and we're have put our minds together. So a
Hmm.
lot of our cards are just one-liners, but not always. Sometimes it's a one-liner and it's a reference to a little Google mini doc
Sure.
where you need to drill down. But even then, if it's a Google Doc, we don't have a standard template for specifications. We just create just what we need to get that mind meld. So,
Hmm.
but the thing that we do is we we're gonna slap a card up on Trello if we're working on something, just so we
Hmm.
understand what each other's doing. So it's like that. We have kind of a clear boundary on that. We have a clear boundary that on the way that we use Git, and there's
Hmm.
going to be version control and check-ins and PRs, and but just real clear boundaries, just a few things that matter.
Sure.
But pick those carefully, because none of it's free. It's all
Right.
time, extra time you're going to spend on the system rather than the result.
Yeah, that's interesting. What I like about what you're describing is how it feels like it leaves a lot of autonomy and freedom to people to in all of that gray area that isn't on one of those boundaries. There's a whole lot of freedom.
Yeah, right. And that is crucial, because again, it comes back to the people, that the more structured your system is, the more the individuals within it feel like gears in this machine,
Sure.
and that undermines ownership. That people feel shy. They're less reluctant to throw out an idea.
Hmm.
And it's kind of like coming back to mock-ups versus like wireframes versus full mock-ups.
Hmm.
That was the genius that Balsamic had when they came out with their tooling. That
Hmm.
uh, it's actually better sometimes to have like the pencil sketched
Right.
um, example of a UI rather than a fully defined one, because it feels fluid. It
Yeah.
feels more like people are just more inclined to be like, well, that's cool, but what about this?
Right.
So being unstructured, it's not just that it's cheaper, it also encourages more collaboration. People feel more freedom.
Yeah. I have a couple questions along these lines. My first one is what happens when cards get old, when like something's on your Trello board and it's a one liner, and um it's been 3 months since anyone thought about this thing. What do we do with it?
Yeah. Yeah, well, in practice, that totally happens, and we go through a process of like pulling stuff out of the backlog. Like, we have come to
Hmm.
Jesus moments where our uh, typically, like, we start out with kind of like to do, doing, done, and then
Hmm.
within to do, there's like to do soon, the stuff that's really on deck, and the stuff that we're
Sure.
not going to look at for a while.
Yeah, this
And
feels
then
like my life right
you
now.
know and then that list, you come to realize where it's like, a lot of the stuff that's over there, it's do never. Right.
Yeah.
And and then you come up with another list of like, these are the things that we've made a decision we're never going to do,
Yeah. Yeah.
and you get it out of your world, or you just kind of so it's oh I to me I I get that overwhelm. It's definitely a part of life, and the
Hmm.
thing is, our aspirations always exceed our grasp,
Sure.
unless you're not trying, right? I mean, if you have if you have all your shit together, you're just not very ambitious. you
Hmm.
know? Um, so then it comes down to like, okay, we captured this stuff, and by the way, another one of our rigid rules in my team is that if somebody makes a suggestion, that goes on the Trello board we link to where it was in Slack where the conversation happened, or we capture the information. This is a suggestion, and we may never act on it. We may decide
Mhm.
not to act on it, but we can still search and find when it comes up. It's like, yeah, what was that thing? You can
Yeah.
find it and get to it, and then pick up from where you left off.
Yeah.
So but a lot of times it comes, you just have like the come to Jesus of like, okay, let's get real. There's a lot of stuff
Yeah.
we want to do. What are we going to do?
Right. Exactly.
And that's what agile is all about, really, right?
Yeah.
It's just focus, but there's a time that you want to focus. And for me, when I get stressed out, I just need to focus down to one thing,
Yeah.
right?
I
So
hear
it's
that.
more like, how do I get away? I don't want any of this. And for me, um, it gets down to a pad, like I get a pad of paper and I just start a fresh sheet, and I write at the
Hmm.
top, this is the one thing. And
Hmm.
this is all I'm going to work on right now. And I do other tricks to fool myself. I set a timer, like the Pomodoro method. I set it to like,
Sure.
I'm going to do nothing but think about this for 20 minutes. And if it's 20 minutes of me being like, I have no idea how to do this thing, fine. You don't get up for 20 minutes. You don't pee for 20 minutes. No, you
Hmm.
don't get a drink. You just take some time and focus, and just do the one thing. So there's a time to focus down, and then there's a time to zoom out, because
Hmm.
to me, there's like two kinds of this. I suffer from two kinds of inefficiency. One is that I'm stressed because I'm like overwhelmed. There's too many things.
Hmm.
There's too many things, and
Yep.
it's hard to focus on any one of them because it's, oh, what about this? What about that? The other kind is, there's a thing I need to do, but I really want to do that. Like, I'm distracted. I want to
Like a squirrel.
do,
You want to
yeah,
chase a
right.
squirrel.
There's
Yeah.
another hole I want to
Yeah.
go down, right? And for the first one, for the first one, um, to focus on one thing, it often helps me to brain dump, to like zoom out, like, okay,
Hmm.
because when I'm stressed out, like, oh, there's just too much, it feels infinite. And
Yeah.
the thing that helps me is like, well, it's not infinite. There might be 100 things, but when you write them down, it's like, oh, actually, after a lot of times it feels like there's 100 things, and once I've written 15, it's like, yeah, that's pretty much it. Oh,
I'm
okay.
I'm missing 85 somehow.
Right. Yeah, right.
Or 85 just don't matter right now.
Yeah, but that, it's like zooming out, like, okay, this is the whole world, and now
Yeah.
you can write as much as you want, but now it's just those things, and now that it's finite, we've gone from infinite to feeling infinite to
Yes,
being
absolutely.
finite. Then now I can pick one, and
Yeah.
then then you can kind of pick that one thing, and then you might be like, okay, well, now break it down. What are the steps? And if there's
Hmm.
a lot of steps, okay, which is the first step? Repeat, rinse, and repeat.
Yeah.
And focus there. So it's like zoom in and zoom out.
Hmm.
The other one is, um, what I just noticed about myself is that my personal productivity varies at least one, if not a couple orders of magnitude.
Hmm.
Like, if I can just get in flow on a thing that matters, um, that's the whole reason I write software, is that feeling. That's
Sure.
that's the drug. That's the addiction, right? Where you just in flow. There's a thing you're passionate about. You understand what you're doing, why it matters, and your whole brain can just dig into that. And
Hmm.
the challenge is sometimes, if I can get in that flow, I'll go with it, even if it's not really necessarily the thing that's most important,
Hmm.
because it's like, if it matters at all, if it's not just a total indulgence,
Hmm.
make as much time for that as possible. And then, when you're not in that flow, it's like, how do I get back there? Right. And,
Yeah.
and, and that's where then the planning is just all of the planning and the conversations with people and the brainstorming is an effort to just find the thing that you can really lock in on. It's like
Hmm.
get it, like in all the what was that? What was that movie with Tom Cruise about the fighter pilots? Top Gun,
Top Gun,
right? So
yes.
like getting radar lock on something, right? So
Hmm.
missile lock, trying to get
Hmm.
missile lock on the thing that you know what you're doing, you know why you're doing it, and you can just get in that flow.
Sure.
So to me, a lot of my life now is just trying to uh, get to that flow,
Sure.
spend as much time there as possible, and the systems are also in service of that for me and also
Right.
for the guys I'm working with.
Right.
And
Yeah.
it comes down to like have making sure when you're delegating a task to somebody, help talking with them about what are they doing so they get it and they're thinking about it and
Hmm.
they're in that kind of flow.
Hmm. Yeah. And I think that what you were talking about earlier with, well, a couple times now, with the boundaries and setting the clear boundaries and making sure that those things that are very, very important are known, but the rest of it, there's flexibility.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't know what the boundaries are or what the very important things are, like that's when you really get lost on something or go down the wrong path.
Yeah, right, right.
Do you allow yourself any freedom to jumping between things until you get to that point that you're locked in on something?
Probably too much.
Too much?
I'm fairly self indulgent with myself. The flip side of it that I think lets me get away with it is I'm also really flexible about like how many hours a day. Like if I need to pull all nighters, or if I need to be up at 3 in the morning, if I need,
Yeah.
like when something's on fire, I'm all about dealing with that. So
Yeah.
um, so like I'm taking this afternoon off and talking with you and getting ready with my wife, and then this weekend I'm going to be probably making up for some things to be ready on Monday, right?
I mean, that's the nice thing about having the ability to be flexible with your time,
Yeah,
and working on things not in an office.
right, right, and I think that's the real beauty of real beauty of working at home. I
Hmm.
use a tool called Toggle. I mean, just for the I hadn't. This isn't so much a productivity thing, but it's like how much should I charge my customer, right?
Hmm.
So I love that tool because it makes it really easy to just say, "What am I working on now?" and start the timer going, and
Ah, sure.
and you can switch between tasks, and just the fact of like um, thinking as a consultant, thinking of like what am I billing for
Yeah.
now,
Yeah.
it also helps to focus you. Um, a challenge. I've fallen off a little bit with that because my client doesn't care. He's just tell me how many hours, But I back in the days when I was running a consulting business, billing time and billing my team's time.
Hmm.
Uh, it was super helpful getting folks in the habit of use a tool. Just say, what am I working on now? That's the only question, but you should always have the right answer. What are you working on now? And
Hmm.
you're billing time. Thinking about your time as billable, whether you're a consultant or not,
Hmm.
is can be empowering.
Hmm.
It as long as long as you embrace it that way, that it's like thinking like a lawyer, right? Thinking about lawyers, they're billing their time at $300 an hour or whatever, but you get a log from the lawyers of like
Hmm.
five minutes on this and 10 minutes on that.
Right.
Um, that can also be a trap, right? All these systems can be a trap
Yeah.
where you're spending more time on the thing, but there's a certain level where it's just anything you can do that makes you think about your time as precious
Hmm.
is empowering because
Sure.
it's finite. We only get so many minutes and then we die, and you never get anything back.
Does that help you stay focused? Like thinking about that?
It does. Yeah, yeah, it does. Thinking about what am I giving this, what am I giving my time to, what am I giving my
Sure.
energy to? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you ever find yourself needing to do that kind of big picture, zoom out, figure out where I am spending my time, and zoom back in and focus on these things so that I can spend more of my time with my family, or like along like setting those boundaries between work and your personal life?
That's a great question. Uh, I do. I The reason I uh, at the point that my wife and I decided we wanted to start a family, that's when I quit my office job and started my company.
Yep.
And that allowed me to largely work from home while I was raising two boys.
Hmm.
And that, I hadn't really thought of it that way, but that has that actually is for me super crucial. It's like putting the family first,
Hmm.
but in the big picture, hoping that they feel like, hey, dad's around for vacations, but yeah, dad might not be able to make this particular soccer game or something because something's on fire right now.
Hmm.
And I think my boys now are in their mid-20s, and I think they have that feeling like mom and dad were both around. So
Yeah.
yeah,
I've
yeah.
never. I mean, like my kids are younger. I've never asked them that question, but it seems like it'd be. I don't know. You might get an answer you weren't expecting if you were
Well,
to explicitly ask that question.
the counter argument is that neither one of them um, has any interest whatsoever in working with computers.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
their takeaway was
Sure.
not that dad has a cushy job.
Yeah, right. And it's interesting because you mentioned that you were a musician before, and
Yeah,
I know that you play a lot of music in your free time. You play music with at least one of your sons.
yeah.
So, I mean, when you look at it that way, like music was a thing that you were doing at home with them for fun,
Hmm.
and that's maybe that's something they picked up rather than typing on computers all day.
Yeah.
So, I think I want to move on a little bit to
Hmm.
things like things that you've tried in the past that haven't worked, or maybe things that you want to try in the future that you think are missing from
Hmm.
whatever systems that you use or your team uses?
The thing that I have never gotten that in my whole life and I'm still struggling with is like taking good notes. I
Mm.
think I think that note taking is just such an awesome skill that I don't have, and like what I don't understand is folks who can have a conversation
Mhm.
and stay in the conversation, be really listening, be there in the moment, be participating, and at the same time capture something
Right.
as that's relevant that you can look back at it
Right.
a couple days later and make any sense out of it.
Right. Right. Like you had to have some kind of insight there. It wasn't like you're just reporting and writing down the exact words that were said.
Hmm.
You're thinking
Yeah,
like this relates to something else, or I'm thinking about this in another way than what we're talking about right now, and
yeah.
writing that down.
And some folks can do that. Like one of the best
Mhm.
managers I ever worked with, he when we would have a meeting, he would put up on the screen wherever you can see the meeting minutes.
Mhm.
And the meeting was in broad scope coming to consensus on the meeting minutes for the meeting. So we're going to talk about everything, but like, okay, does this capture it? And then at the end of the meeting, there's the minutes. And
Wow.
I love that. I can't do that. I'm terrible at that.
Yeah.
But that is an awesome skill. Maybe it helps. It's a lot easier to do that if you're just listening and you're not talking.
Yes, I agree with that. Yep. I have a coworker who's similar to what you're describing that somehow can take these incredibly detailed um, logs of what we talked about and also contribute. And I don't
Yeah,
understand it. You're right.
yeah, yeah. To me, it's either or. It's like the talking, and if I'm talking, I can't write. If I'm thinking, and even when I'm thinking, like I struggled with this in school too.
Hmm.
That taking good notes is hard because the professor's talking about stuff and you're
Hmm.
trying to keep up with what they're saying and also think of like where is this going and why does this matter and integrating it with other stuff, and at least that's where my mind is going, is
Hmm.
thinking about what they're saying. And probably that's my mistake, is like maybe the note keeping is more just if you have good notes, you can go back and have all those other thoughts constructively
Mhm.
later.
Yeah,
Don't
definitely.
get ahead of yourself. But that's note taking is something that I really wish I was better at and have always struggled with. For me, the bullet journal method, that's the whole appeal.
Mm-hmm.
That's the whole appeal of that. But what makes that work is it's personal, right? It's journaling.
Hmm.
Uh, for someone who doesn't know, bullet journal is a focus on thinking about what's important, but also getting it in kind of a bullet form. So it's not long introspective
Hmm.
diary entries. It's more like getting to just the crux of what matters. And there's a focus on doing it, with a pen
Yeah.
and paper, specifically because that's slower than typing. Like it forces you to, boil it down to just the minimum thing that you can write. And
Right.
I find that really good for stimulating that kind of thinking, but it only works for me because I only do it, not in a conversation. I do it
Right.
when I'm by myself.
You can do it when you're taking your time.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm capable of writing good notes, but I just can't do it in real time.
Right. Yeah, yeah. I feel that for sure. I even outside of taking notes, that is, I find that I am a slow processor of information. So like conversations in general. Um, if we were to have a conversation, like I would come back the next day. I wouldn't come back the next day. The next day I'd be feeling like, oh, this is what I think about that. But it can take me like a day to
Yeah,
even figure out what it is that I think. Are you
right.
similar to that?
Yeah, it's very much like that.
Yeah.
Uh, and and I think to me the most interesting conversations, and one of the things that I've always loved, a quality that we have that in our conversations is
Mhm.
that it's sort of a joint discovery of like, what is it that I think about this?
Oh
It
yeah,
comes out in
totally.
the process of talk, just talk, and you get some feedback of like, wait, what? And you drill down and you back up, and at the end of it you kind of get to what is it you
Yeah.
thought, so so
Yeah.
I like that, and that's, to me, that's kind of what collaboration is about.
Yeah, for sure. Again, having those freedoms to
Hmm.
do things on your own and figure things out on your
Hmm.
own, but having a little bit of guidance from each other.
Yeah, yeah, along those lines, sometimes I subject my wife to like talking about like design discussions. Like, just, I have a design decision. There's a thing that's bugging me, and she is not a technologist at all. She doesn't
Sure.
program. She has very little interest in computers, but uh, sometimes I just need. Look, she's the only one around, and I just kind of need to talk this through. And it's
Hmm.
the um, putting it into words, just like with bullet method, writing it down on paper forces you to slow down. You have to
Hmm.
slow down to a certain extent and serialize just to talk, just to put your ideas into a stream of words, one word after the other, for in sentences that
Right.
maybe have some coherence. And so I've she indulges me in that, and sometimes helps me talk through stuff, even when it's like she's like, "Yeah,
She doesn't have any idea what you're talking
yeah,
about. Yeah.
any idea?"
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a few things here, like kind of tooly types of things
Hmm.
that you've talked about that you use in certain situations, like just one thing,
Hmm.
Pomodoro, bullet journaling. It sounds like there are times when those you feel like those make sense and you need to do them, but you don't do them all the time. That's correct. Is that correct?
I'm very situational with the tools.
How long does it take you to know what the situation is? Are there any times where you get it wrong, or it takes
Yeah.
you too long to figure out what the right outlet is for whatever it is that you're trying to do, and what do you do then, or how do you figure that out?
Well, you make mistakes all the time, right? That's what we're trying to do is fail fast.
Sure.
So the you just you have we had a design meeting today, earlier this morning, and I thought we were going into this and we were just going to get applause and say, yeah, ship it. And the
Yeah.
feedback we got is like, you're solving the wrong problem.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. But we scheduled that meeting to double check that we were on the right path
Right.
before preparing the training doc and going through the publishing. We had some more steps with actually shipping some software that we didn't do
Yeah.
because it's like maybe we are doing the wrong thing. So
Yeah.
fail fast, yeah. And then beyond that, the other thing, of course, is if you offend people, right? And I've done that. You say the wrong thing, you're off on the wrong tangent, you're coming from a different place, not understanding where they're coming from. And there it comes down to, do people trust that you have the right intention?
Yep.
Like, and so I don't know. I try and let folks know that I'm going to make mistakes all the time. I'll try and keep you informed, and I'm going to screw up. And do you trust that I'll fix it when I do?
Yep.
You know.
The memory of a goldfish. I like it. So do you have any interesting stories about when these systems have failed miserably or succeeded, like incredibly?
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. The lack of structured systems fail me when you realize later that, oh man, you're redoing stuff. Yeah, here's a story. Um, we were we were working last year on a big project to put out a mobile version of our website,
Hmm.
and we were getting really deep into it, and we were in flow, and we were kind of making things up, and we were rapid prototyping. Not a lot of doc, not a lot of requirements, and we weren't producing artifacts. We were producing code,
Hmm.
and we were all there in the moment. And we were demos every day. It was great. But then some other huge project came along, um, and it was like we spent months understanding way more than I ever wanted to know about sales tax and how that varies in different states and how you collect it, and exemption certificates and Nexus, and that project, sat on the shelf for 6 months,
Hmm.
and now we're trying to, you know, dust off. Where did we leave off? What parts of this did we solve? What didn't we solve? And
Right.
um, yeah, so that's a moment where it's like, God, wish he had written some more down.
Right.
Uh,
But
you
it's kind
know,
of trade-offs, right? Like
yeah,
you're accepting the trade-off of you're going to have moments like that so that you
yeah,
can move more freely the rest of the time.
right, yeah, and there are lots of stories of spending a huge amount of time,
Yes.
developing maintenance documentation for systems that are put out of commission before anyone ever,
Right. It just gets
uses it.
thrown away. Yeah. Trade-offs.
Yeah, trade-offs.
Early in the conversation, you talked about how you were previously a musician. And I was wondering if there is any crossover in this discussion with when you were a musician. I mean, you still are a musician, right? Like
Yeah,
you
yeah,
play.
yeah.
But is there any sort of crossover in that conversation or in those areas of your life?
There is. I can say that a lot of the great programmers I've met have actually, we got to know each other, find out, oh, they're musicians as well. They play
Yes.
something about music. So, music is dealing with on the, it's especially jazz, right, where you're kind of improvising in the moment. You're creating something collaboratively in real time with other people. So that's a function of listening and contributing, but
Hmm.
it's also built on a whole lot of shedding at home, right? Practicing your scales, your harmony, breaking things out in isolation.
Hmm.
So for me, the crossover is sort of the blending these opposites of structure and discipline with freedom and creativity.
Hmm.
And So yeah, I don't know. It's all about uh, it's all about the team and that communications and the rest of it. Like you um, a lot of times if you want to have jam sessions with musicians, right? You If you can just scribble down a couple chords, a couple changes. Hey, here's a
Mm-hmm.
couple changes I want to work out. I don't have full charts. I don't have the whole of melody, but here's a little structure we can work with. You
Mm-hmm.
might get a lot of times further and do something a little bit more interesting if you start
Right.
with a little bit of structure than if you don't, and then you just end up playing 12-bar blues for over and over.
Right. So you get to take advantage of all the brains in the room and all the ideas in the room, and
Yeah.
you're not so much focused on the one thing that you have in your head.
Yeah, but in both the thing that crosses over is in both cases you're confronting a challenge of choosing the right amount of structure for the
Mm-hmm.
moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Interesting.
That's the thing that crosses over.
Yep. That definitely aligns with what you had been saying earlier about how you're situational and the tools that you choose and how you know when to choose the right thing. I like that.
Yeah, and it's different for different organizations, right? I have the benefit of this because I'm in a very small organization, and
Mm-hmm.
every and super high retention, and uh, in other situations, previously I worked in architecture. I was a consultant in the architecture group for a big online education company where they had hundreds of developers, uh, different time zones, offshore
Mm-hmm.
developers, and we necessarily had to have a lot more formality in the process because
Mm-hmm.
they also had a culture where they the way that they like to schedule work had a presumption that the same team wasn't going to keep working on the same feature.
Sure. Right.
So at like for them, for their organization, that was one of the hard lines that they
Yep.
chose to be important. That we want, people are going to come and go. Any team should be able to pick up any feature, and you can do it that way. But there's a lot more
Mm-hmm.
a lot more
Definitely.
formality and structure because that's what you need if that's what you want.
Right. Yeah. It's trade offs again. You're choosing all of that time documenting things,
Yeah,
but you get to have anybody pick up the work.
right. And yeah, and what I wanted was not to work there anymore.
That's fun. Cool. Jay, is there anything that I missed in this subject that you'd like to talk about?
uh, no, I hope it's been useful.
It's been great.
Thanks a lot, Steve.
Thanks for listening to another episode of a Developer Experience podcast. Thanks to my guest, Jay Cincotta. You can find Jay on LinkedIn. I will link to his profile in the show notes. If you like the show, support it at the podcast home, anchor.fm/a-developer-experience. I'm Steve Hicks. Check stephenhicks.me/where to find me on the internet. Take care, friends.